an all-day news channel, all-day sports. Sports will be very, very well received.
But programmes may not be well received if the present mishmash of broadcasting standards continues. The satellite viewer will need one of these receivers to decode the signal. BSB plans to transmit programmes in an advanced system called DMAC. Europe wants a different version called D2MAC, as well as existing PAL and CCAM systems. With pressure from governments and manufacturers with vested interests, it looks as if ASTRA and BSB will be forced to go their separate ways.
It's rather like the early days of the video revolution, when the public was offered different systems which weren't compatible, didn't work particularly well, and they didn't know which way to turn. So the result was they didn't buy anything until very simple systems came from Japan, and the de facto standard emerged as VHS, the simplest system that did everything at the push of a button.
With this uncertainty, the consortium that's the first to blaze a trail could be the one to set the standard and take the market lead. Still aiming to be the first off and grab the lead is ASTRA.
The Chateau Betzdorf, Luxembourg. It's been converted into studios and offices for the new television satellite service ASTRA. And in its grounds is the giant 11-metre dish which will track the satellite's orbit after it's been launched in November. It's from this new ground station just outside the city that Luxembourg hopes to continue its tradition of independent broadcasting to Europe.
The dish farm is where we are testing equipment.
ASTRA's commercial director is an enthusiastic Englishman abroad, Marcus Bicknell, who revels in high technology.
For uplinking the satellites, the actual channels. And then as a separate function, a dish to control the satellite, to keep it in orbit for 10 years. Now we're entering the main satellite operations control room. And in here are the two consoles which actually control the satellite, and the permanent staff sit here and keep it in orbit. And
at ASTRA headquarters, the technology is ready and waiting.
Online computers. The chateau used to belong to the Grand Duke of Luxembourg. And his son
with stylish apartments to match.
To commemorate the birth. And we're now redoing it to be the offices for the staff.
All they need now is a successful launch and programmers willing to pay an estimated £4 million to lease each of its 16 channels. So far, no one has signed up.
Our first program makers, I'd love to say it's today or tomorrow. I'd love to say it's the day after you screen this show, but lawyers and transponder contracts and guarantees of everything we've got to do with all this are very difficult to wrap up in a matter of days. No, we've been at it now since the middle of November, and it'll take another few months to have the total package together.
I have to say to you that I have a very obscure idea of exactly what ASTRA is going to offer. I very much doubt they will be offering 16 channels, and certainly I very much doubt that they'll be offering 16 in English. So, in a sense, one has to wait, I think, to hear more clear messages from ASTRA.
Right, we now come
BSB, on the other hand, has no ground station as yet and works out of these temporary offices in Old Park Lane, London. But it does have a clear picture of its programme package.
The whole thinking behind the negotiating process with ITN has been to try and underline to them the real competitive nature of what we're doing. We're out to take viewers and advertising from ITV.
ITN has signed a 3-year, £30 million contract to provide the news for BSB, with BSB apparently making the running.
Just to summarise, what they've agreed to do is set up a new company, which they will own, but it won't be called ITN. They've agreed that they'll provide us with a product which will be our product. It'll be branded under our name. It won't be called ITN. And they've agreed, probably most importantly, to come and work from our corporate headquarters.
On offer last week were more contracts for the Now channel worth £60 million, and invitations have gone out to 50 manufacturers to tender for the receiving kits.
We've made it very clear to them the different nature of the service we require and how commercial it has to be. This is the survival of BSB we're talking about here.
Anthony Simmons-Gooding, BSB's chief executive, is a seasoned campaigner, more at home in media circles than with space technology.
We will win or fail on our programmes, and the investment levels on programmes is enormous. Secondly, we are IBA regulated, so that we are entirely within the guidelines in terms of taste and violence. We have no European connections or aspirations, so we're entirely focused in programming terms, again, and marketing terms, on the UK.
The choice has got to be a choice of something completely different and not a reproduction of the same. If you want to make a new BBC and a new ITV and a new Channel 4, great, have a go at it. But I don't think the public is that interested.
Whether or not the public is interested will depend a great deal on the selling powers of the high street retailers, like Dixon's, which face an uphill task explaining 2 new systems to the market. But with the sale of video recorders reaching saturation level, the trade welcomes a new gadget to promote.
It's our job to mass market this product. We have to educate the public into what they can actually buy. And the idea that they can come in for £250 or £300, which is not a lot of money if you look at the prices of products these days, they can receive 10, 15 new channels in their home. It'll be our job to educate them, to sell them the equipment, to deliver it, install it, and service it.
This week, ASTRA starts a hard-selling campaign to promote its satellite television to retailers, who must convince the doubting consumer. BSB has earmarked £60 million for its marketing campaign, which starts in earnest next year. But confusion about what's on offer could be a golden opportunity for the hard-pressed rental industry, which has seen a steady decline in business over the past few years. DER has several years' experience of renting existing satellite systems, which cost about £1,000 to buy.
We currently charge about £50 a month for a system which has a 1.8 metre dish, for example. Now, over the next few years, that's going to come down to something like a 60 or 40 centimetre dish, and we reckon the price will come down to something like between £20 and £30 a month to rent that. Clearly, the advantage of rental is that you are able to maintain your freedom of choice, hedge your bets, if you like.
On top of the monthly rental or purchase price will be the unspecified subscription for a film channel. The cost of satellite TV is crucial, but no one was prepared to say exactly how much it would all cost.
A lot of their success, indeed the estimates they expect to make in terms of money, depend upon having the large audience. They both guess roughly 500,000 to start with, growing to about 5 or 6 million in 5 years. I am not sure that we will see necessarily that growth. There are problems associated with the age situation we have of our viewing public. A large number of people are moving to retirement. They might necessarily wish to spend money on these sorts of expenditures for just satellite television. So I think the important thing is the growth may not be as fast as we initially expect. I would like to come back in 5 years and compare the number of viewers with their initial estimates of 5 and 6 million.
Of its £250 million investment, ASTRA will spend £200 on the hardware. BSB's costs are higher. Everything relies on the first stage, a successful launch. Both launch rockets have had failures. ASTRA's Ariane have caught the headlines.
Rockets are a problem. Any type of rocket, and the shuttle and any American rocket is witness to the fact that it's like lighting a blue touch paper and standing clear and hoping to God that it's going to work. The Ariane rocket is no worse than the average of world rocket launches, successes and failures. So the nature of the satellite industry is that once you're up and operating, you have a big business. If you're not up and not operating, you don't.
For BSB, there may be another competitor looming large on the horizon, the extension of the existing 4 channels to 5. The government, with the IBA and BBC, is examining the possibility of creating a 5th channel by altering existing transmitters. It would cost about £20 million to bring a 5th television service to most homes.
Now, clearly that is peanuts compared to the hundreds of millions which it costs to launch and run a satellite service. If the public are offered the chance of simply tuning an extra button on their television and perhaps altering their existing roof aerial, if they're offered that as an alternative to spending several £100s on a complicated dish system, then it doesn't take a genius to know which one they'll go for.
The first thing, it doesn't require just a tweak on the television set. It needs a new bit of stuff up in your aerial, and I don't know what it'll cost, but it'll cost something, and the whole business getting somebody to do it and all of that nonsense, which consumer inertia is usually considerable, unless there's something well worth going for. However, much more important than that, we have been given to, we are convinced, and we're given to believe by the Home Office that our view is supported, that the terrestrial alternatives will take a long time to come to market. I mean, there's a lot of speculation and there's a lot of admin to be gone through, applying for frequencies and white papers and legislation and debate and more legislation and more debate, and then raising the franchise, applying for the franchise, and then getting your act together. And we feel confident that we will be trading for at least 3 years before any serious terrestrial competition comes to bear.
BSB has given itself 3 years to break even. 3 years in which to win over consumer inertia and reach an audience of about 4 million. But competition from ASTRA could make that an impossible target to reach.
At the end of the day, who's going to win the battle of the dishes?
Absolutely not zero question in my mind. I mean, if I might make so bold, the real question is, how well will BSB do against ITV and BBC? ASTRA is an interesting tactical competitor, but the real battle is on the high ground of BSB, a £600 million venture, against the might of BBC and the might of ITV. Now, that's an interesting one. And there we are, David and Goliath, but David didn't do too badly.
1988 has been dubbed the year of the satellite, with more television channels on offer than ever before. The question is, which package will the viewer be prepared to pay for? ASTRA with its wide choice of British and European channels, or BSB with just 4, but carefully targeted at the British audience? Over £1,000 million worth of investment rests with their decision.
Robert Maxwell and Rupert Murdoch have declared their intention of battling it out for a share of Britain's potential satellite TV audience. Yesterday, Maxwell and his partners announced plans to launch 7 new channels within the next year, and later today, Murdoch will unveil his scheme to launch 4 channels using a Luxembourg satellite, ASTRA. Up to now, the satellite wars have been focused on the continent of Europe. But a new generation of cheap, small dishes make Britain an attractive proposition for broadcasters.
The present market for satellite television in Britain is small. About 250,000 homes can receive it via cable, and only about 5,000 households have actually gone to the expense of having satellite dishes installed. These measure about 6 feet across and cost up to £1,500. Installation can involve building a concrete surface in the back garden. Users subscribe to 16 channels, but the dishes can pick up many more from other parts of the world. The ASTRA system, favoured by Rupert Murdoch, dispenses with many of the problems. The beam will be more powerful and can send 16 channels to a 2 feet wide dish. It's much cheaper too, costing about £300. And from August next year, another company, British Satellite Broadcasting, will be offering 3 channels on an even stronger signal to a dish measuring only a foot across. The price will be about the same. Satellite TV is already popular in the rest of Europe. In Britain, the established broadcasting organisations felt investing in the system was too expensive, so the way has been left open for commercial companies who hope for considerable profits. And in the case of Rupert Murdoch, it's a way of consolidating a worldwide media conglomerate.
Well, with us now, Alan Burkett, the editor of Satellite A to Z. You may not read it very often, but it comes out bi-monthly, apparently. Right, Mr. Burkett, the prospect of Mr. Murdoch and Mr. Maxwell, 11 channels of them, it's a pretty fearsome prospect, isn't it?
Oh yes, there's going to be a lot more competition for BBC and ITV.
I mean, potentially this could be devastating for the BBC and ITV.
Yes, and I think the cable companies that are already showing a lot of these existing channels are showing that there is a lot of audience demand for the new television channels.
Now, this item you have next to you is a dish. Is this one of the new type of dishes?
Yes, this is what will be available from the end of this year. At the moment, if you have a satellite system, you're going to have a 6-foot dish, as we've just heard. The more powerful satellites, like ASTRA and the BSB satellite next year, will be able to go into one of these, which will fit on a chimney stack.
So more or less anyone could have
wall.
that on their roof, couldn't they? And what sort of price is it going to be selling for, do you think?
Probably about £300, maybe a bit less, about the same price as a VCR. That's the dish plus the receiver, which will go on top of the television set.
And video recorders have what sort of penetration now? I mean, how many people...
60% of the
60% of homes have one?
Yeah.
And are they expecting a similar sort of proportion of people going to satellite dishes?
I would think so. In about 5 or 6 years, they're hoping that the same sort of penetration will happen, so most of the homes in the country will have one of these on the roof.
Now, presumably you buy that from the hardware manufacturer or the satellite service company. How do Mr. Murdoch and Mr. Maxwell and all the others who are doing this not out of the goodness of their hearts but to make money, how do they actually make money?
2 ways. Advertising, which is a bit of a difficult problem. In the States, it's been very difficult for satellite and cable companies to make money simply out of advertising. Usually they also have a subscription service. They scramble their signals. You have to pay an annual fee to the television channel in order to get the pictures.
And this presumably is going to make the British government and things like the Broadcasting Standards Council and the BBC's Board of Governors and the IBA and the rest of them look like an irrelevant tea party, isn't it?
Well, I think probably the Broadcasting Standards Council will extend its remit to include satellite television, but on the other hand, it's pan-European television. It's not just aimed at the UK, so it's cross-border television. Lots of other governments are going to get involved as well, which may mean that we end up with a lot of bland television because they've got to follow everybody's rules. We're not going to have unbridled sex and horror, I don't think.
You mean even more bland television? Becky, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
The common or garden hedgehog is rapidly becoming an endangered...
To receive them. The channels will offer round-the-clock entertainment, news and films, and there could be a 4th channel devoted entirely to sport. Mrs. Thatcher has welcomed the spread of television channels, but she told the TV companies today that if they didn't keep violence and pornography off the screens, the government might have to act to protect the young.
The presentation was appropriately astral. The video rockets, real smoke effects, almost too realistic as Mr. Murdoch outlined his plans.
We will be bringing, for the first time, real choice of viewing to the British.
At present, most homes receive 4 channels from a conventional transmitter. Cable television has proved expensive and slow to expand. Now a new generation of satellites needing small dishes is taking off. Over the next 2 years, at least 7 high-power satellites broadcasting directly to the home are due to be launched over Europe. They'll broadcast up to 100 channels in various languages. In Britain, the TV revolution lifts off in November with the launch of ASTRA. It's on this satellite that Mr. Murdoch will run his 3 or 4 new channels. The dish to receive the signal from the medium-powered satellite will be 24 inches wide and cost £199. By the end of next year, British Satellite Broadcasting will also beam 3 channels to British viewers. Because that satellite's high-powered, their dish need be only 12 inches wide and cost £200. The ASTRA dish can be adapted to receive BSB. The BSB dish won't receive ASTRA. Mr. Murdoch said he'd abide by the new Broadcasting Standards Council. So would he scrap a programme their chairman wanted banned?
Absolutely. I don't think I would in the area of news. I think that then you're venturing into freedom of speech. But if it's a matter of taste, I don't think he's going to worry about it. Our standards that we currently apply on Sky Channel, I think, are stronger than anything he is contemplating.
The channels announced today will be free to viewers and paid for by advertising. So it's the advertisers who'll ultimately decide if satellite delivers the goods. Sarah Cullen, ITN, Central London.
Mrs. Thatcher told an audience of media executives that she welcomed more TV channels. It didn't mean TV would go down market, but she did warn her audience they had to practice self-discipline over violence and pornography on the screen.
If you do not succeed, then we, as a matter of public policy, a phrase I rarely use because I'm constrained in what government does. That is my belief, to constrain the powers of government and to increase the powers of the people. But we simply must protect our young people from some of the violence and pornography that they would otherwise see.
Mrs. Thatcher will wait to see if the Broadcasting Standards Council can work out a voluntary code to offer that protection to children. But it's being made clear at Westminster that if she judges the voluntary code is failing, there'll be legislation to force the authorities into line.
The world of show business has paid...
Newspaper tycoon Rupert Murdoch plans to start beaming 3 new satellite channels direct into British homes next February. The new channels will use a new satellite whose signals can be picked up with equipment costing just £200. Up to 16 different channels from various companies could soon be available via the same satellite.
The launch had elements of science fiction, but Rupert Murdoch is about to harness space-age technology to bring 3 new channels into thousands of British living rooms. Sky Television will offer a general entertainment and arts channel, a 24-hour news channel and a feature film channel. There are also plans for a sports channel. ASTRA is getting in on the act with a satellite dish the size of an umbrella to pick up the new programmes. Thousands will go on sale in high street shops early next year. Until now, satellite broadcasts used low-powered signals. To pick them up, you needed a large dish, 6 feet wide and costing at least £1,000. Murdoch's channels will use one of the new medium-powered satellites. You can pick up the signal with a much smaller dish, measuring just 2 feet across and costing around £200. In future, channels like the British Satellite Broadcasting Group will use new high-powered signals which can be picked up by even smaller dishes, 1 foot across at about the same price. But British viewers will need to buy a special converter, and at the moment that's still at the prototype stage. When BSB start broadcasting, Mr. Murdoch may well have a head start that'll prove difficult to overtake. He says more channels will not mean declining standards, and he'll abide by the new Broadcasting Standards Authority. He believes viewers do want more choice.
I think they would love 100 channels to choose between. They wouldn't watch them all, of course. I think that is one of the things about modern civilization, that people should have freedom of choice. They have freedom of choice of what they read, let them have freedom of choice of what they view.
But the new era in broadcasting depends on the latest Ariane rocket, which will take the ASTRA satellite into orbit. Today, its launch was postponed for the 3rd time because of technical problems.
The Prime Minister has warned broadcasters that if they don't keep violence and pornography out of people's homes, the government would act to protect young people. Mrs. Thatcher was speaking to a lunchtime audience of journalists and television editors. She said she was asking the programme makers for self-discipline and self-regulation.
The annual lunch at the Savoy of the Press Association is a gathering of newspaper owners, journalists and broadcasters. Mrs. Thatcher took advantage of this captive audience to give her clearest warning yet that the government is ready to legislate to control sex and violence on our screens if the industry does not regulate itself. In the past, she said, certain customs and conventions had been accepted, but with more and more channels on the way, these no longer applied.
Now, some of that force of circumstance has gone, and there's only one thing to replace it with, and that is the force or plateau or attainment of self-discipline. And that is what I'm asking you, and self-regulation. That is what I'm asking you to exert. If you do not succeed, then we, as a matter of public policy, a phrase I rarely use because I'm constrained in what government does. That is my belief, to constrain the powers of government and to increase the powers of the people. That we simply must protect our young people from some of the violence and pornography that they would otherwise see.
According to the Prime Minister's advisers, the implication of this warning is that if the new watchdog, the Broadcasting Standards Council, does not succeed, then legislation may be necessary, and that could include giving the law officers and the police powers to prosecute under the criminal law.
The Labour MP Ron Brown will not have to face a private prosecution for damaging the House of Commons mace.
And have you ever been to an auditor? They'll produce home satellite dishes to receive his pictures for around £200 each. Mr. Murdoch's venture the ASTRA satellite and will be financed by advertising. He's offering separate channels for round-the-clock news, entertainment and films, and there could be a 4th sports channel. Michael Crick reports on Rupert Murdoch's latest acquisition to his media empire.
The man may own more newspapers and more television stations than anyone on earth, but a Rupert Murdoch press conference is a rare thing. But today, the Australian-stroke-American media baron thought he had good reason to make a noise. By taking 4 English-language TV channels on the new ASTRA satellite to be launched this November, directed primarily at the UK, Mr. Murdoch has found a back door into British television. But the owner of 5 British newspapers sees the venture not as an extension of his large share of our media outlets, but as more competition.
Our record in this country has been to create competition and indeed to enable it. And we think we're doing the same thing now in television. We are seeing, I think, the dawn of an age of freedom for viewing and freedom for advertising.
It's the profits from News International's controversial print operation at Wapping which have provided the means for Mr. Murdoch to pursue media ambitions on 3 continents, in particular money from the mass circulation Sun and News of the World. Around the globe, Mr. Murdoch's News Corporation turned over £2.5 billion last year on its 47 newspapers, 48 magazines and 10 television stations. But his only existing impact on British television is through the 250,000 people who can get his current satellite station, Sky Channel, on cable television in Britain. But Sky Channel, broadcast across Europe for 5 years now and funded by advertising, lost £10 million last year. Murdoch media outlets are encouraged to fertilise each other. This journalist spends most of each day at Wapping before reading several short Times headline bulletins for Sky Channel each evening.
Good evening. The main headline...
And News International print journalist may help his new 24-hour ASTRA news channel. In America, Mr. Murdoch's TV company Fox is responsible for this programme called A Current Affair.
A current affair comes...
It broadcasts the pleadings of a woman about to die in a tower block fire.
I can't breathe, I'm going to pass out.
We'll send an ambulance.
Hurry!
Did anybody do anything, finally?
Yeah, they found her body at 4:45 in the morning.
In Britain last year, Murdoch's Sun and News of the World accounted for 23 of the 50 complaints upheld by the Press Council.
I'm very proud of all my newspapers, and I'm sure I'm going to be proud of what we do on this channel. Thank you.
Is it going to be the same kind of standard of journalism as we see?
It's going to be totally, it'll be totally different. I've told you it'll be absolutely first class. Thank you.
But will anybody watch satellite television? At present, only 1,000 TV satellite dishes are sold in Britain every month. This company, Megasat in London, sells these dishes, which receive all satellite channels, and sells them for between £500 and £1,000. But installation costs can be between £100 and £400 on top, so it's expensive now. But today, Alan Sugar of ASTRA announced plans to storm the shops next year with new ASTRA dishes for £199, and he hopes for a £40 installation cost. But more important, Mr. Murdoch's ASTRA channels will use the existing PAL television system, which is compatible with people's existing TV sets. That is seen as a vital decision.
All colour television sets in Britain at the moment work on the PAL system. The satellite services already available work on the PAL system, and the grand plan was that there will be a completely new system used for satellites, which is the MAX system. That's developed by the IBA, and it's going to be used by the British satellite broadcasting people. Now, what Murdoch and Sky and ASTRA have come in and said, all that goes out of the window, we're going to stick with the existing PAL system. And that's wonderful in the short term. It means that existing equipment will be able to receive these programs. In the long term, it completely pulls the rug from under the plans to have new technology that will take us into the next century.
It makes life much more difficult for BSB, presumably.
I actually think it makes life incredibly difficult for BSB because they are committed. In fact, they are under duress from the British government that they must use the MAX system.
So, Mr. Murdoch's ASTRA channels seem to have a big advantage over his main satellite rivals. His ASTRA channels are launched this November. He uses the existing PAL system, which should save viewers trouble and cost, and the system will be financed in the medium term at least by advertising. BSB, on the other hand, won't go up until September next year. BSB is obliged to use the new technology, DMAC, which will mean more expense for viewers. And viewers will have to pay for many BSB programmes. But Anthony Simmons-Gooding says his service will provide better quality.
Our dish is 30 centimetres, and we have a satellite which is 8 times as powerful as ASTRA's. And I'm quite convinced that when they get to it, many parts of the country will have to have a dish of a metre. And that's a whole new ball game of planning permission and cost.
I mean, is it going to be possible for both the ASTRA system and the BSB to survive in this very competitive field?
Probably not. There are already 4 broadcast channels in the UK. There's almost certain to be a 5th. ASTRA carries 16 channels, of which perhaps 11, 12 might be aimed at the UK, and BSB carries 3. I can't really see that there's enough of a market to support 18 television channels.
So who do you think will win?
Well, I think the important thing is it's all going to be down to programming. One of the advantages of BSB is they're going to spend an awful lot on programming, but they're starting a year later.
So, 2 of the world's best-known entrepreneurs unite to usher Britain into the age of satellite television only a few months from now. They're providing between them programmes and satellite dishes. It now depends on the Ariane rocket, launched from French Guiana on November the 4th. And rockets have been known to fail.
Michael Crick. Well, after his news conference this morning, I asked Rupert Murdoch about what he called the dawn of an age of freedom for viewers and advertisers. Was he saying that his principal obligation was to them rather than to his shareholders?
Oh yes, I think in the media you should know that our principal obligations are always to the public. Of course we all have obligations to shareholders. You do, I do. Anybody working for companies that are owned by the public have obligations.
But your prime motivation here is to make money.
Oh, absolutely. We think this is a great commercial opportunity.
Then how many people will have to buy satellite dishes tuned to your channels to enable you to make the return you're looking for?
I think something north of 3 million, but that's a guess.
And if it starts making a loss, if you can't achieve that target, how long will you go on subsidising it?
Oh, it'll make a loss to begin with. You can say as we begin our investment in this, there's no doubt at all this takes time. When you start a newspaper, you make a loss. We're today subsidising Today newspaper, which makes a loss. And the Times, we believe they both will be very viable, important media properties, just as we believe these television channels will be.
But television is expensive, as you know, to make programmes.
So are newspapers.
Well, I wouldn't mind betting that television is a lot more expensive than newspapers to produce. But if the hemorrhage of cash can't be staunched, will you set a time limit on how long you'll take the losses, say 5 years?
Oh, of course. Whether it be 5 years or 4 years or 6 years, that will depend on its extent. But we don't believe that will happen. We believe this is a great opportunity and we're going to press it.
During that time, there may well come a moment when you've got to decide how you attract more people to buying satellite dishes. Now, in the newspaper industry, it's not been unknown for you to go heavily down market in the quest for readers. Would that apply to television too?
Nor indeed is it unknown for me to go heavily up market, as with the Sunday Times very successfully, and the Times. What's going to happen here is that the audience is going to fragment, and one is going to be able to direct much more different segments of the audience. And I think that will also create much satisfaction.
What I'm getting at is, in your news conference this morning, you talked about the Times news headlines. But if you have to go for more viewers, could we actually see the Sun news headlines?
I don't know. We may very well. I find the Sun headlines very enjoyable, and so do about 12 million people out there who I'm not going to join you in sneering at.
No,
oh, yes, you are.
You didn't see me sneer.
Well, it was a question full of sneer.
Well, let's go on.
Slight inference, shall we say. Well, but that's all right. I understand a lot of people in this country take an elitist view that the public should be given what the elite think they should be given. I believe in trusting the public.
Well, let's get this whole business of standards out in the open. There is a body of opinion, and I'm trying to depersonalise it totally, that believes that you are principally associated with down-market journalism, which fabricates facts and in the United States is starting to make television programmes that pander to the worst sort of morbid interest. Mm-hmm. What's your answer to that?
I would say that is complete nonsense. Anybody who's made a study of my career knows that is a nonsense. Anybody who's bothered to look at our television programmes in America could never make that statement.
On the question of standards, generally, do you see the need for regulation?
Yes, I do. I don't know how much. We already comply with all the standards of the British Cable Authority, which are pretty rigorous, and we more than comply with them. You watch Sky, there is nothing that anybody could complain about. Indeed, we're very much more prudish than goes out on either BBC or ITV. However, we now have a standards authority being set up under Sir William Rees-Mogg, and I imagine that he will be laying down some new standards, and we will certainly be complying with those. We don't think with any difficulty, but we'll be complying with them.
Have you spoken to him?
Yes, I have.
Have you given him binding assurances that you will be within his remit?
Yeah, well, we don't know what his remit is yet, but we've had a conversation, and I've said that we would certainly be complying with whatever standards he lays down.
Do you think it's healthy for democracy that you control a third of our national newspapers and will shortly control half our television channels?
Well, the answer to that is we're not doing anything of the sort. We took over a series of failing newspapers, made them successful, created a condition in the marketplace where other people could come and compete with us. We now have the wonderful luxury in this country of 11 national newspapers. And that fact is not unassociated with what we have done at News International. And we're very proud of what we've done there. We believe in television. There won't be 8 channels. There'll be 80 channels before very long. There's going to be infinite variety, availability of choice. We think that's good. We'll let the British public decide who they'll watch.
Rupert Murdoch. And there we take it.
Regulation, multiplicity of choice to people and to advertisers all over Europe. And it's time it happened here in Britain.
Good evening. Britain's most powerful newspaper tycoon is promising to introduce at least 3 new satellite television channels by early next year. He says he'll do it quicker and cheaper than any of his competitors. People will be able to receive pictures direct from a new satellite with a dish that'll cost them £200. I'll be asking Rupert Murdoch how far down market he'll have to take his new satellite programs in order to make them pay. In South Africa, black trade union leaders are claiming a major success at the end of 3 days of protests, during which millions of people have stayed away from work. But the South African government disagrees. We talked to Manpower Minister Peter du Plessis, who says his door is always open to trade union leaders to put their protests direct to him. Another cluster of leukemia cases is pinpointed around a nuclear power station, this time at Dounreay in Caithness. And we have the details of a special police report which shows that violence on the streets is a real and growing crime in places where you'd least expect it, the towns and villages in Britain's rural heartland. But we begin tonight with the second proposal this week from a media mogul to reshape British television. Mr. Rupert Murdoch has unveiled plans to provide 3 new satellite channels from early next year. Viewers will be able to receive the programmes on their existing sets using a new low-cost dish. Mr. Murdoch was giving viewers and broadcasters a new glimpse of the fast-approaching free-for-all competition for the airwaves. And Mrs. Thatcher gave a warning that she would use legislation to enforce broadcasting standards if self-regulation failed. Addressing an audience of journalists and broadcasters today, she said, "We simply must protect our young people from some of the violence and pornography that they would otherwise see." Mr. Murdoch's move follows yesterday's announcement by his media rival Robert Maxwell of his plans to expand into satellite television, and it signals further growth in Mr. Murdoch's already vast media empire. Mr. Murdoch's media interests cover the globe and are estimated to generate sales of well over £2 billion. In Britain, they include The Times and The Sunday Times, The Sun, News of the World, Today, the satellite television company's Sky Channel, Elle magazine, and stakes in publishers William Collins and Pearson, which owns Penguin Books and The Financial Times. In America, there's 20th Century Fox, the film company, Fox Broadcasting, which makes television programs, a string of television stations, magazines and newspapers, including the Boston Herald and publishers Harper and Row. Most of the newspapers sold in Australia are Murdoch-controlled, as are the Fiji Times and the South China Morning Post. And now he's expanding his interest in satellite television. Well, Wesley Kerr reports now on what Mr. Murdoch today called the dawning of a new age of freedom for viewing and freedom for advertising.
Puffs of smoke heralded the latest expansion in Rupert Murdoch's global empire, 4 satellite channels beaming pictures primarily to Britain. his Sky channel should be the first of a bewildering array of new networks with diverse technology on offer to the public from numerous media conglomerates.
So I'm happy to announce today that Sky will be leasing 4 transponders on this magnificent...
Murdoch hopes to steal a march on competitors by beaming his mix, including features, news and sport, just before Christmas to satellite dishes specially built by entrepreneur Alan Sugar's Amstrad.
I'm very confident in the programming that Mr. Murdoch is going to put on these 4 channels, and I'm also very confident that if the British consumer can see that it's good programming, they will go out and spend another £200 so that they can see it, in the same way as they went out and spent over £200 when they bought their VCR recorders.
In boardrooms, advertisers and their advisors, like Charles Johnshaw, who also advises government departments on broadcasting, see ventures like Murdoch's as part of a new technological age.
This is the first time that a really major and credible media figure has announced that a service will be launched which falls outside the UK, if you like, regulatory jurisdiction. So this is not any of the IBA-controlled or BBC-controlled channels. This is not like the BSB satellite venture, the British Satellite Broadcasting venture, if you like, sponsored or authorized by the British government. This is a satellite which will beam down from abroad that will be outside the control of the British regulatory authorities, and which, because of the credibility of Rupert Murdoch as a businessman, as a media entrepreneur, is very likely to be a serious business venture.
Satellite stockists have been waiting for a much-heralded sales boom for years, but it hasn't happened. Only an estimated 15,000 dishes have been bought in Britain. So why is that takeoff now possible? The existing low-powered satellites like Intelsat have had limited take-up because they need a large dish to receive the relatively weak signal from space. They cost about £1,000 to buy, and the 6-foot dish needs planning permission too. The new generation of satellites like the Luxembourg-based ASTRA, from which Rupert Murdoch is leasing his channels, will be medium-powered. Robert Maxwell's channels may use similar technology. A dish will cost around £200 and measure only 2 feet across. High-powered satellites like those which the IBA-sponsored British Satellite Broadcasting Group will use from next year will have a £200 dish measuring only 1 foot across. Some analysts think Mr. Murdoch may have a commercial edge by being first.
The reason his service is likely to be successful, where other past projects haven't been, is that he's picked the most straightforward, fastest way of reaching people. He's picked a low-technology solution so that people can get his satellite service on their existing television sets, just needing a dish that will cost about £200. They won't need a new television set, which would be a barrier to its take-up.
British Satellite Broadcasting was the official franchise choice for 3 channels on British-owned satellites. But they're not starting till autumn 1989, months after Mr. Murdoch, who hopes by then to be well on the way to his targeted million sales in the first year.
I think it's highly unlikely that he'll put 1 million out into the market in year 1, and for 2 real reasons. First of all, his receiver equipment, in my opinion, is very expensive, and I don't think his programming is all that good.
How can you convince the public that your programs will be better than Rupert Murdoch's?
Mainly because they are going to be better. If I take the film channel, ours is a subscription channel, 250 new movies every year. His is a free movie channel. They'll be as old as the hills and older than ITV and BBC. Take sport, we've got the football deal. We're going to have a sports channel of total excellence. Take news, he's going to aim at Europe for news, international news. Ours is going to be UK news, aimed at the UK market. I think we'll win on every count.
Whoever wins the battle for satellite viewers, how much medium-term effect will the new age of broadcasting have on the existing BBC and ITV networks?
The satellite systems which we see, both those that Rupert Murdoch has explained this morning and the and BSB, will make an impact, but I very much doubt that it will be a massive impact when compared with the audiences obtained by conventional terrestrial channels, both those in the commercial television system and indeed the BBC.
What worries many is how the plethora of programmes beamed in from space, not legally subject to British regulations like the new Broadcasting Standards Council, can be monitored for taste and decency. Not all operators will be willing to adopt Mr. Murdoch's promised self-regulation.
It's going to be very difficult to regulate the contents of a new channel such as the ones that were announced today. They fall outside the jurisdiction of the IBA, of the British government generally, since they beam in from a satellite which is abroad and which has not been authorised by the UK. Ultimately, there are sanctions which could be taken, sanctions against advertisers, for example, but that is fraught with difficulties. So I think we can expect the government to be thinking very hard and to be somewhat worried about the implications of this for content regulation.
I think that if his programmes on ASTRA begin to debase the coinage of broadcasting, then he'll have trouble. I can't say how, but I believe that to be the case.
But Mr. Murdoch's planned Sky network is causing more immediate concerns about the amount of global media power centred in one growing and financially flexible corporation.
I think it illustrates very well the explosion which is coming in satellite broadcasting, and with that is a dreadful warning about what is likely to happen. We've seen what Mr. Murdoch has done to newspapers both in this country and around the world, principally by lowering standards and pandering to the lowest possible taste. And this is clearly what's going to happen with satellite broadcasting, because the big drive there, and you've got to be very quick about it, is to capture the biggest audience that you can, so that you milk the advertisers for as much as you can, as quickly as you can, before somebody else gets them.
Robin Corbett speaking to Wesley Kerr. Well, I asked Mr. Murdoch whether it was entirely healthy that a man who already had the whip hand in Fleet Street should now be moving into television.
Let me challenge that first, because I don't have the whip hand anywhere. Thanks to what we did, we took over and revolved national news, one after the other. The Sun, the Times, and now Today. We have a long way to go on the latter yet. We have then changed the industrial climate in Fleet Street in a way which has made possible new newspapers to start. If it hadn't been for us, it was very painful, very difficult, the Wapping experience. Hadn't been, there would be no Independent today. You would not have the Daily Mirror even making money, let alone the Daily Express or the Daily Mail. It is thanks to us that there is now open competition, and anybody can make a run at us and produce newspapers. One has already done so very well, and I expect there'll be others. Television will be the same.
What do you say to those people who say Murdoch already has the lion's share of the newspaper market? He shouldn't really now. It's unhealthy for him now to be moving into the television market.
Well, what are you saying? I mean, you don't let the failures go into television? That's been, well, I better not say that's been the policy of the IBA in the past, but, you know, there's something in that. The fact is that we should not be penalized in this country because we have been successful in publishing. We expect we will have a smaller share. There'll be other people who will start in newspapers, and we think this will be a very small share of broadcasting, smaller than we will like.
You mentioned the IBA. It does have its rules. It would not be possible, would it, for you to have a large share in an independent television company? I mean, a controlling share in an independent television company. They wouldn't allow that. Now, is this your way of leaping over that barrier? They bar you, the IBA bar you from taking over ITV, an ITV company. Is this your way of leaping over that barrier and getting into the television business when you know you can do that without that bar?
Well, I don't know whether that's true. I think all the rules are changing now. Technology is ahead of all the authorities and all the politicians. And we're seeing deregulation, multiplicity of choice to people and to advertisers all over Europe. And it's
you telling viewers they'll be able to see on your channels? Will they be able to see the kind of quality material of your Sunday Times, your Times newspapers, or are they going to be looking for page 3 of the Sun and the News of the World?
Well, I think you can be pretty confident it won't be page 3 of the Sun. We like to keep that exclusive. On the other hand, it'll be broadcasting. It's going to be to appeal to people with authority, with taste, with quality.
Does that make money, though?
Absolutely, it does now, and it always will.
But won't your temptation...
I mean, it's a very subjective judgment of what your taste is against mine. It may be that you only like to read the Financial Times, and I'm quite unashamed, I enjoy reading the Sun too.
Indeed, but won't you be tempted by the fact that the Sun and the News of the World are the papers that have brought you the readers? won't you be tempted to go down market with your television channels too, to get the biggest audience?
I think we will go down the road like the BBC with something like EastEnders.
You won't be
we'll
appealing
have
to
the whole spectrum, from an arts channel late at night to programs like EastEnders. Now, that may not appeal to your taste. It may be too popular for you, but most people like that.
You're not going to be appealing all the way through your program to the lowest common denominator?
Of course not.
Now, how are you going to satisfy people like Sir William Rees-Mogg, who of course are actually unable to stop you because you've got a satellite beaming the stuff in? How are you going to be able to satisfy him that standards of decency will be maintained on your channel?
Very easily. I'm a bigger prude than Sir William is. And I think if you look and see what's going out on Sky Channel now, there's nothing there to rival his favourite programme, LOLO.
Sir William Rees-Mogg also reads the news of the world in the Sun. He may not quite agree.
I don't think he does. I doubt it. But he's not in a position yet of censoring all the newspapers in this country.
But supposing he says to you, look, I want to look at some of your programmes, I want to veto some of your programmes if necessary, because I think they're not matching up to the standards of decency this country requires.
Well, that is a very interesting question. I would like to say I would agree to it, but I think there's a big principle involved. And we would follow, I think, the lead of the ITV and the BBC companies in what they decide to do in a similar circumstance.
Rupert Murdoch. In South Africa, the opponents of apartheid are tonight claiming a significant success at